Chicago. Hey, Chicago, how you doing? Before I begin, is it okay, Leader Abrams, if I call you Stacey just for this evening?
Absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Can I call you Jakey Boy?
You can call me. You know you can. That's what you were calling me backstage. It's a delight to be here. I have read and enjoyed very much Rogue Justice. It is a really, really great read. It is an exciting, smart thriller. And not everything that's smart is thrilling, and not everything that's thrilling is smart, but it is that. Let me start with just the basics. When do you write?
So first of all, thank you, Jake. And before we do this, I want you all to also help me thank our interpreters and our caption writer who are doing all this.
I told my interpreter to give me a Philadelphia accent. Do you want to show the crowd? Do you want to show the crowd what I said that looked like? Yeah. That's my. If you're mad, be mad at me, not at her.
Yes. Mine's just going to say "bless your heart" a lot. So. No, look, I sleep. I'm very organized about the things I want to do, and I believe in what I call work-life Jenga. Work-life balance is a lie. And so instead, I take all the things I want to do, I stack them up, and then I follow Eisenhower had this taxonomy for what you do. He said there are things that are important and urgent, things that are important but not urgent, things that are urgent but not important, and things that are neither important nor urgent. And you give primacy to the things that are important and urgent, and for me, writing is one of those things. Your next thing should be things that are important but not urgent, unless the urgency is your fault. And so if it's important but not urgent, you do that. For things that are urgent but not important, you figure out whose fault it is. You can either help them or blame them. Those are my words, not Eisenhower's. And then in the last corner, it's things that are not important and not urgent. And I try to do some of those things too. And if you stick enough of those in, sleep becomes optional.
Do you write every day?
No. Nope. So I write to deadline or to idea. And so if there's something I just have to say, I will sit down and write it down. If I have a deadline, I will figure out which days I need to write. So for example, I've got a children's book that's due. I've done the first draft. Well, thank you. Now the editor wants the actual book, so I've got to make the revisions. And so I've picked the day I'm going to get it done. And on that day, it will be the only thing I work on. But I am not disciplined in the sense that, Toni Morrison would wake up every morning at 5 a.m. and write. I'm not waking up at 5 a.m. on purpose ever. It's just wrong. But I know how many words I can write in a day. I tend to lay out my book enough that I know how long I can write a chapter in a day. So I know how much I've got to write. And so I lay out the number of days it will take me to write, how many chapters I'm going to write, how long my chapters are going to be on average. And then I plot it out against all the other things I've agreed to do, where someone either wants their work or they want their money back. And so I sort of map all of that out, and then I get a book.
And so we're not gonna get to everything if you clap for everything she says. Can we just assume everything's brilliant and we'll just do it all at the end? Because I have a lot of questions. That's what I do. And also just so you know, I said to Stacey earlier, is it okay with you if I don't ask about the debt ceiling? I really would like to talk about your book. And there's a lot of politics.
I'm going to have her answer in the Philadelphia accent.
There's a lot of politics in the book. So don't get me wrong. But all right. So George R.R. Martin, the Game of Thrones father, said that there are two kinds of writers. There's architects and gardeners. The gardeners just go out and they grow it. and the architects come up with the structure and then fill it in. Which are you?
I'm an architect who likes landscaping.
Okay. So do you write an outline first?
I do. So I write a synopsis. So I tell myself the story I think I'm going to tell. Then I do an outline to figure out if I've actually figured out enough of the middle. And you know this as a writer. The beginning and the end are the easiest parts. It's the middle that kills a book. And so I make sure I've got enough substance, and I figure out what I need to know to write that middle. Then I lay it out in a storyboard, so I lay out the chapters as I think they're going to happen, and then it all goes to hell. But I at least have a sense of how I'm going to get to the end when I start, and then I get surprised by what my characters say or do, by something I learn along the way, or by some prestidigitation of thinking that has me doing something completely different than I imagined, and I've got to figure out why I did that, and slows the book down.
And a lot of people, in case you didn't know, Rogue Justice is on the New York Times bestseller list. It just made the New York Times bestseller list.
Thank you, because you guys bought some books, so thank you so much for making that happen.
So it is her fifth New York Times bestseller. So that's awesome. Congratulations on that. You wrote a lot of fiction under a pseudonym. Romance novels.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair? Okay. I didn't know if that was considered a pejorative term in any sense or whatever.
No.
Yeah.
Harlequin would tell you no.
Yeah.
So technically, I write romantic suspense. So in the romance writers universe, I kill too many people to be straight romance. So I'm romantic suspense.
I've heard that about you.
Yes.
It was in the Oppo file.
Exactly.
Leaked to me. And why did you write them under a pseudonym?
So my very first publication, and this all goes together. So my very first publication was when I was in high school. I slept through a test in physics and had to convince my teacher to not give me a C because I would have to explain that to my parents and why I was sleeping through tests. And so he let me write a paper. I'm a pretty good writer, and so the paper I wrote, he was a grad student at Georgia State University, and he showed my paper to his team, and so as a high school student, I got published in the Journal of the Astronomical Society of the Atlantic for Georgia State University, a paper I wrote on Mesopotamian astronomy. Now, that is important to the story.
Who of us has not
Okay. So
done that?
I say that
I did
to
that
say
in fifth grade.
So fast forward. This is relevant. So I write this paper, I get it published, and I'm like, oh, yay. And I think for a minute I'm going to be a physicist, and it turns out I just want to watch Star Trek. But thank you. So in law school, I write two things at the same time. In 1999, I wrote my very first romantic suspense novel called Rules of Engagement, but I also wrote my very scintillating tax policy treatise called Devolution's Discord, Resolving the Operational Dissonance of the Unrelated Business Income Tax. Now, they were both being published in the same year, and Google had just become a thing. And so one of my friends called and said, Stacey, put your name into this thing called Google. I'm like, what's a Google? So I put my name in, and up pops my article on Mesopotamian astronomy. And it occurs to me that if I'm writing romance and tax policy, because at the time that was my future, no one is going to read romance by Alan Greenspan. And so you can write romance under a pseudonym. You cannot write tax policy under a pseudonym. And so Stacey Abrams became the tax writer, and Selena Montgomery became the romance novelist, and that is how I came up with a pseudonym. But my name is in all of my books. My picture's on the book. I've never denied. I've always talked about it. It's just much easier when people are looking for you, for them not to be distracted by the fact that you also like to, pontificate about the inequities of the income tax structure and how it underfunds communities of color. So,
Although, spoiler alert, that is the motive for the murder in Chapter 8. Inequities in the tax policy. Avery Keane is the main character of Rogue Justice, and also, of course, While Justice Sleeps. Avery Keane is a law clerk, brilliant, demanding. How much do you see? I mean, this is a trite question, but I had to wonder while reading it. How much do you see yourself as Avery Keane, or vice versa?
So Avery is an amalgam of lots of different people and things I wish I was or pretend I am. I love the fact that she is both, intellectually smart and street smart. I really wanted someone who had, at this moment in her life, had responsibility but no authority. I spend a lot of my time there. And it's an important place to be. It's important to understand the choices you make when there are things that have to be done, but you don't have the authority to make anyone do anything, but you feel a sense of responsibility to make it so. And there's a moment when you're 25, 26, 27, where that sense of where you fit into the spectrum and becomes even more acute. I didn't have a quarter-life crisis in the traditional sense, but I did have to decide whether I was going to stick with being a tax attorney or if I was going to go into the direction of public policy. My mom calls it my trajectory of downward economic mobility. And so I wanted to, in hindsight, I'm like, let's see what happens if someone else has to make these choices. So she is me, but she is so much more than I am, and she's pieces of other people. Like, I was never a clerk, never had any interest in being a clerk, but she pulls from the person I think I could have been and the people I really admire and like.
And how did you come up with her name?
I like names. I mean, when you write novels, so because by the time I wrote Avery, I'd written 8 novels, and you just start collecting names, and you start thinking about what names resonate. I just like the idea of Avery Keane. She wasn't named after anyone. Like, my pseudonym is from Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched, and see, Elizabeth Montgomery. And if you remember, her evil cousin was Serena. I didn't like my R's, but I like my L's, so I became Selena Montgomery. Yeah, see? So it wasn't that, but it was just a name that when it popped into my head, it just made complete sense that would be who she was.
So Rogue Justice, like I said, it was a smart thriller. There's a lot in there about real life things. I'm really trying to walk a line so that I don't spoil anything for you, okay? For you people. But it's not spoiling it to say that the FISA court, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, which is the court that allows people in the intelligence community to spy on various individuals who may or may not be Americans, who may or may not be in this country, but it's all done through the auspices of, no, we're spying on this guy in Pakistan, and who knows if he's talking to somebody else. I mean, and it's a very secretive court, and the things that are told to them are not always accurate, as we've learned, and the decisions they make are not always right, but it's a secret court. And the FISA court and the vulnerabilities in the FISA court, theoretical, are a big part of this book. And first of all, reading this book and reading all the ways that are very real, when you see a movie or a TV show and you're like, well, that would never happen, that could never happen. And it's like everything in this book could totally happen. And I guess we're all really lucky that you decided when you were having your quarter-life crisis not to become a criminal mastermind.
You're very welcome.
Because I think you could have done it. And we know you like to kill people.
That's a dangerous thing to say in Chicago.
No, you say that and they elect you governor. That's in this state. Oh, come on, 5-year governors went to prison. You guys voted for them. I'm from Philadelphia, where the government is clean. So, anyway, how much were you worried that you were, I mean, what went through your head when you were like pointing out all the incredible vulnerable positions where, well, if you wanted to blackmail, again, I don't want to spoil too much, but this is very early in the book. If you want to blackmail members of the FISA court, you could do that, and you could really wreak some havoc. How worried were you at all?
So I do a lot of research, not to become a criminal mastermind, but I write things that are entirely possible, just not highly probable. And that's always been how I have enjoyed my romantic suspense novels. Everything I write about could happen. And I think it's really important because if you want someone to believe, you want them to be able, you don't want them to suspend disbelief, you want them to be in disbelief, but then be like, oh God. You don't want people to be terrified, but just a little worried when you're done. And I also want experts who actually know what I'm talking about to respect the stories. And so when I was thinking about it, my younger sister, one of my sisters, I'm the second of 6 kids, so one of my sisters is a federal judge. And she was at a conference and brought home the brochure from the conference, and I'm flipping through it, and there was a mention of FISA, and I thought, what if? And then it spun out from there, and then I started thinking, what if you could blackmail federal judges, and what if you could do these? And so for me, it's how do we send up a flare and say, this is something we should think about? I mean, and while justice sleeps, it's premised on the fact that the Supreme Court, and that our federal judges, but especially the Supreme Court, they cannot be removed from office for simply not being able to do their job. You can remove a president under the 25th Amendment. You can not re-elect someone in Congress. But a federal judge has a lifetime appointment, and they can only be removed for high crimes, misdemeanors, or death. And when we say misdemeanors, it's misdemeanors with a capital M, and so not jaywalking. Like, you've got to do something really bad, and you've got to be impeached. Otherwise, you get to keep the job. And we've not fixed this in 246 years. We've never really thought about the fact that maybe someone could go into a coma for 30 years, and you can't take them off the court. And so when I thought about the FISA court, it was similar. There's this vulnerability to an area of the law that we don't think about very much. Most people don't. I mean, you did some excellent reporting on the FISA court. But most people don't wake up thinking about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. But it governs, and it's designed to protect national security. So it's critical to who we are, and yet most of us have no idea that it exists. And so I want you to pay attention.
And it's shrouded in secrecy, and they change the judges every few years. And
their opinions are not subject to public disclosure. You cannot go online. You can go to the FISA court. You can find out who's been appointed. You cannot see their opinions unless they choose to release those opinions. Congress gets a report, and they can get some information. But it is the most secretive court in America, and it has the right to wiretap us, to surveil us. It has to be connected to national security, but as we know in recent years, that has become a much broader net than it was when the FISA Act was when FISA was first created.
You talked about Congress. Politicians in this book are not particularly admirable characters, regardless of party. Democrats, Republicans, evil, feckless, only concerned about elections, only concerned about power. It's an interesting choice.
I would not call them all evil and feckless.
Evil or feckless. One or the other.
Look, politicians by their nature, it's a job. And politics is a job, let's be clear. And for most of us, our mission is to keep our jobs. And so we then get surprised that politicians will take actions to keep their jobs, that they will strategize to keep their jobs. Again, what I talk about is possible. I go closer to probable with these characters than maybe comfortable. But I think it's also important when I was writing this, I didn't want to cloak. There's a tendency to want to make people either too righteous or too noble, and they're not. And I will actually say, I'm reading your book, The Hellfire Club. You understand this, that politicians are people. And they're people who've been given remarkable power and the ability to make decisions with very little oversight. And when you think about what they have to choose to do that and the decisions they're faced with, and that these are just average, these are normal people. I wouldn't say average, but some of them are, painfully average. Some of them are extraordinarily gifted, and some of them, you're like, did you win the lottery? Like, what happened? But they all get there and get the same title and the same job. And so I think part of it for me is to humanize, but also to reveal. Like, some of these conversations I use in this book are echoes of smaller conversations I was either a part of or tangential to at the state level. I mean, we weren't dealing with, national security, but we were dealing with important life-altering decisions, and you're sometimes surprised by how little the people are actually a part of the conversations.
I shouldn't say that all of the politicians are either feckless or evil. That's not accurate. The vice president Schlossberg is not, and most of the cabinet is not. But the main characters who are politicians.
Oh, he's a jerk.
Yeah. Well, not just. Well, I don't want to spoil it, but not just the main 2 or 3 politicians, but also the leaders of the House and Senate.
The people with the most power who want to keep that power and leverage that power are willing to do a lot to maintain that power.
Early in the book, again, if it's in the first 3 chapters, I don't feel bad for you if I spoil it. First 3. But early in the book, there's a deep fake that ends up having an important. It's important to the plot, and we are in an era now where artificial intelligence, AI, and deep fakes are getting really good in a very, very potentially troubling way. I don't know if you saw. I mean, it was actually amusing, but the Donald Trump Jr. put out a scene from The Office. But it was where Michael Scott accidentally buys a woman's suit, somebody, not Donald Trump Jr., had deep faked Governor DeSantis's face and voice, so it was and it was really good and it was very funny and effective. But what about the next time when they're trying to make it a real depiction of somebody, and it's not an obvious spoof? This is obviously something you worry about.
So if you've been watching the news, the creators of artificial intelligence, the people who stand to make the most money from it, on the leading edge of it, are begging Congress and international authorities to regulate them. When someone says, please regulate me, we should listen.
Stop me before I kill again.
Yes. I mean, when they use the phrase extinction level event, let's believe them. All apologies to our forthcoming AI overlords. But, we should be really concerned that we have a technology we don't understand, we cannot control, and a small sliver of our population has even the slightest inkling of how it comes into being. And that, to me, if we could have had this conversation 40 years ago about the internet, I remember the day before there was an internet and the day after. We want to remember the day after AI takes over without having to, apologize. And the reality is, it's not just going to be the sort of Terminator type. It is your kids not learning because they can get away with it and you can't mitigate it. I mean, my niece lives with me. She's 16, so I call her my borrowed 16-year-old. I'm giving her back eventually. But and you have children. The first time she mentioned using AI, and the kids in her class who were using AI with their teacher's permission to do notes, and my thought was, oh dear God. And the whole idea for the teacher was, well, if I know they're doing it, it's better. But we're integrating at a very young age a very powerful tool that they don't control and they don't fully understand, and they don't, using your word of architecture, they don't have the architecture to manage what they are building. But that's also true for a lot of adults, and it's going to be true for corporations. And so, yes, we should be both afraid, but we should be righteously engaged, and we should do something about it. And we do have possibly feckless leaders who would like to be corrected if we tell them now, please do something about it.
So Tom Friedman, he had this, I heard him speak one time, and he had this interesting, I don't know if he made it up or he was relaying it from somebody else, but it was about how technology has improved, and it's like a graph like that, and the ability of the public to understand how technology is improving. And it goes like this, and then you get to 2007 on the technology with the internet and smartphones and Facebook, and the technology goes like that. And the people are still going, they're still cruising here. And we saw some of this in 2016 when fake news, actual fake news, not just stuff that Donald Trump doesn't like, but actual fake news, when news organizations were invented and put on Facebook, and your dear Aunt Sadie it didn't even occur to her that it was not true. And that's where QAnon comes from. That's where 35-40% of the country thinking that Joe Biden is not the duly elected president. Whatever the percentages of people who are somehow able to maintain the thought in their heads that Donald Trump is still president and Joe Biden is also not the legitimate president and ruining the country. I mean, it doesn't even make sense at a certain point, or at all from the very beginning. But deepfakes, that's just going to blow it all to smithereens.
Because they're going to have you announcing what happened and explaining it. So to the person who is mildly suspicious of what seems like a possible untruth, they will have a person of authority validating the lie. And that's what's more terrifying, because what we've dealt with fake news has largely been, we're going to give you information without context or anchor. Deepfakes allow people of authority who are trusted messengers to be manipulated into becoming the voice of the lie. And that's what should terrify us, because most of us don't have the capacity, we don't always know how to parse out that information. And sometimes it sounds just close enough to the truth. That's the most dangerous one. The completely clear, transparent lie, yes, you're like, how could you possibly hold both of those things in your head and think they're true? What's more dangerous is the thing that sounds kind of true, that you're slightly incredulous about, but then you're like, oh, but Jake said it, so it must be so. When I was growing up, it was Peter Jennings. If Peter Jennings said it, okay. And we don't have as many of those people, but the ones we do have are now subject to potential manipulation. And then you're running around sort of swatting down and playing whack-a-mole with which things you said and which things were true, and just how, is it off by 5% or 25%?
I feel like we should get a percentage of whatever the wine sales are going to be after we just depressed everybody. I'll take bar, you take
there
cover.
You
You take door, I'll take bar.
Okay.
In addition to Avery, the world that you create in Rogue Justice contains a lot of powerful women. There is the Chief Justice, Teresa Roseborough, to the enemies that she has, one of whom is an assassin and one of whom is the mastermind. That's also interesting choice. And let me say also, I love the evil mastermind. She's great.
I do too.
Was that important to have the two of the worst bad guys in the book be bad gals?
In a lot of thrillers, the protagonist, we've seen more women protagonists. We rarely see women villains. And if you really believe in diversity, we should be everywhere. And I do the same thing with race. I want it to feel normal. It doesn't change the story, but if representation matters, it matters everywhere. And so for me, it was important. Yes, you can clap for that. Go ahead. Ignore Dick. It matters to me, and I also like just the juxtaposition of Hayden and Avery, and you find out Hayden's name early.
Yeah,
so
like chapter 2 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanted the juxtaposition to be both relevant and a bit chilling, and just sort of watch their evolutions and figure out what they're going to do with who they are.
Honestly, it didn't even occur to me until like today when I was thinking of questions about the idea that Hayden and the assassin are women. It felt natural, and they were very credible. Let me ask a couple questions that have been submitted.
I'm concerned that you think it's natural for women to be assassins, but okay, go ahead. But I'm glad I did that for you.
Well, you like to kill people, as we've established. All right, Elliot has a question. Picard or Kirk?
So I grew up without CBS. I grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi, where we only had ABC. So my first introduction to Star Trek was Star Trek Next Generation, 1989, so I will always be Picard. With the deepest respect for the origination and the originator of James T. Kirk, but I did not grow up with Kirk, so.
What do you think of the movies? Have you liked the movies?
If you are a Trek fan, you like every other movie. You respect all of them, but you like every other one. So yes.
What character from Star Trek, this is from Brett, what character from Star Trek has taught you the most about leadership?
Catherine Janeway. Okay, Catherine Janeway, Voyager is, so Catherine Janeway is the captain of Voyager, first woman captain. She gets thrown thousands of miles, 70,000 light years from home. Her job was to keep her crew together and maintain the ethic and the integrity of the Trek ethos, but without any supports other than her leadership. It's easy to, not easy, it is easier to lead when you have people around you who are reinforcing the best behavior. But when you have to convince people to do the right thing when there are really no consequences for doing wrong, when you have to convince people who know that the likelihood of achieving your ends diminishes every single day, and you still get them to stay with it, and when you are willing to make mistakes and own it, because she was the first captain. I mean, Picard made mistakes, but they were always righteous mistakes, and Picard rarely, the one time he almost did something bad, they cut it off before we knew if he really did. Did he see two lights, or did he, how many lights were there? But, you guys know what I'm talking about. Even Locutus, sorry, this is a conversation for
I
the
really
Trekkies.
hope there's a lot of Trekkies here.
Yeah. they're making noise. But my point...
Brad and Elliot.
My point being, she had to make choices, but she also made terrible mistakes that she had to own up to. And in leadership, it is easy to lead when you can do the right thing always. The strongest leaders are the ones who can make mistakes and recover from those mistakes and maintain the respect of those they lead, and that, I think, is the strongest lesson you can learn.
Aaron asks, what inspires you to continue your fight for change?
My parents. So my mom and dad were civil rights activists as teenagers. My dad was arrested when he was 14 for registering black people to vote. We grew up with, my mom called us the genteel poor. My mom had a lot of phrases for being poor and broke and stuff. But they never allowed us to wallow. It was, your job is to make the world better for others. We had 3 jobs: go to church, go to school, and take care of each other. And when they said take care of each other, they meant your job is to take care of the people around you. No matter how little you have, there is someone with less. Your job is to serve that person. And my dad's phrase was, no matter, he's like, having nothing is not an excuse for doing nothing. If you see something that needs to be done, your job is to do it. And so, indoctrination works. And I have not been able to shake it. So there you go.
Daryl asks, is democracy scalable across such a depth and variety of social, political, and economic interests? Is it possible that there is a tipping point for a society beyond which democracy as a vehicle of governance is not well suited?
So
Show yourself, Daryl.
Yes. Yes. My question is Daryl's name Jake?
I would only support a monarchy if you were the queen. Other than that, I'm
Nice
democracy
save.
all the way.
Now, look, democracy by its nature requires that we sublimate ourselves to the needs of others. That when you don't win, you still support those who do, and you have the right to continue to push your agenda and try to win the next round. But democracy requires that there's competition. Otherwise, there's nothing to vote on. There's nothing to compete for. And so, yes, it is scalable, but it is difficult. And my framing of it is democracy is resilient, but it is also fragile. And the challenge of scale is not whether there is the capacity, it is whether there's the willingness. Your suspension of your own needs to make democracy continue to work is absolutely, it's a facet of its capacity. And I've gone through some things with democracy being challenged. I've talked about it a little bit. Just a few times. But I'm never going to denounce the necessity, nor am I going to diminish the importance, because it is a system that presumes that humanity deserves to move forward, and that our participation in that progress is both a choice but also a necessity. And I want to be a part of that. I want to be able to make that real. And there are always going to be those who prefer autocracy and authoritarianism and fascism. Those are easier things to do. It is much easier to just push an edict and make it so. It is harder to do what's right for someone else and possibly what's not best for you. But it is achievable because we've been able to do it, and we've gone from a really small democracy to a really big democracy, and we can do even more. It's just going to get harder and harder, and we've got to keep recommitting ourselves to its growth.
So one of the questions I have for you about your races for governor in 2018 and 2022, which obviously had disappointing results for you and your fans, is how much do you think the groundwork you laid in 2018 created the results that worked well for other Democrats running statewide, Joe Biden, John Ossoff, and Reverend Warnock? Because it wasn't until, I'm professionally a skeptic, and I've been hearing Democrats talk about how they're going to turn Georgia blue for my whole adult life. They say it about Texas too. And until, recently with the same results. But can you point to, even though the results for you and your races were disappointing, do you think, I'm glad I did that because if I had not done that, then this would not have happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and look, and I think, I am part of the scaffolding for building access. But the proof points for me are, one, in 2018, we had the single highest voter turnout, not just for Democrats, but for people of color in the history of the state in a midterm election. And when I say that, I mean, in a midterm election, we outperformed any previous election, including presidential elections. But what's even more important to me is that in 2022, based on the work that we did and the project that we invested in and the work we continue to do, even though it didn't benefit me directly, Georgia was one of only 2 states where black voter turnout did not drop precipitously. Nationwide, it dropped down to roughly 84% of what happened, between 76 and 84% of turnout in 2018. In Georgia, it was 92% of 2018. That was a dramatic difference, a dramatic distinction that made an absolute difference. It didn't get me over the hump, but it certainly helped make certain that Senator Warnock was returned to office. And I am absolutely, and because he and I got roughly the same turnout of communities of color, it just turns out white people didn't like me as much the second time. I mean, that's a statistical truth. It's not a personal thing. At least I don't take it personally. But statistically, what we built did not, it sagged a bit. It did not crater. And I think that is absolutely a testament to my fundamental belief that you talk to people who are ignored, that you invest year-round, and that you treat voters with respect. I don't see, and you know the political parlance, you have turnout voters and persuasion voters. I see every voter as a persuasion target. There are those you're persuading to change their ideology, and those you're trying to persuade to believe that their votes matter. And my focus has been on those communities who never believed that it wasn't whether they were going to vote for me or the other guy. It was whether they were going to vote or not vote. And we have turned non-voters into voters. And we've sustained a number of those people. There are more to go and more to get. And that's the continuing project of both democracy and of the work I do. But absolutely, I put it this way. I applied for a job twice. I had my application rejected twice. But the work of democracy was done both times. And I'm going to keep doing the work regardless of whether I get the job.
Just a straight down the middle pitch.
Okay.
I'm reading your book, and there are a lot of characters and things, and I'm wondering if they're based on certain things. Luke Boylan, member of Congress who becomes the chief of staff.
Yes.
Is that Matt Gaetz?
It is not. However, I think that Matt Gaetz would recognize aspects of that character.
Just to be clear, there's no underage women that made the... I'm saying there weren't any.
There are not.
Just as the same with Matt Gaetz.
I will say this.
There weren't any.
You and I both know there are a lot of politicians who have escaped public notice but have questionable capacities and get jobs they're not supposed to get.
Yes, quite a bit. There is a website called verityvictory.org, which is basically a smear website. It's where people get smeared. Is that Breitbart?
No, that's stopstacey.org.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah, there was a whole thing against, yeah. They started, that one was truly inspired by the fact that after 2021, in 2021, my opponents in Georgia launched this thing called Stop Stacey. They were not joking around, so, so yes.
Avery Keane has a photographic memory or something akin to it. I think she's also very detailed and corrects people when they're wrong, and so it's not actually a photographic memory. It's like a...
It's eidetic.
Yeah,
yes.
Whatever that word means. It's in the book, too. I meant to look it up. So, do you?
I do not have a true eidetic memory. I have a very, very good
Can you define, because I know I'm not the only one here that does it.
So eidetic memories come in different, so you have those who have true photographic memories, meaning they can recall images or words. There are those who can remember all the biographical details of their lives. There are those who have the ability to just retain copious amounts of information. I have the ability to look at and retain more information just from sight. I do not have a true photographic memory, but I am able to retain fairly large amounts of information. I'm good at recalling numbers and words and ideas and names and faces and stuff like that, but I do not have a full eidetic memory.
The president, in one scene, Avery Keane reads a passage, and could you do that? She opens up a page of a book, of a famous book, and then is able to read the paragraph. Remember the paragraph.
I cannot do that. Okay, it sounds like a parlor trick. I can recall things I have read years later and do it, but I have to
word
spend
for
some
word?
time. Sometimes, yeah. But I have to think about it. She can do it because her brain just collects that data. I can recall information that I have learned and retain it for some time.
Okay, the president in the book, he's a war hero. He's completely immoral. We haven't elected a war hero president in decades, so I don't know. Is that based on anybody?
So honestly, I wrote Brandon Stokes in 2010. And it was, again, he was a compilation of presidents that I grew up with, leaders, international leaders that I'd read about. And he's immoral but not amoral. And I think that's a difference that matters. Amorality means you don't have a compass. Immorality means you have a compass, you just choose to go away from it. And I think that's why Brandon Stokes, to me, is a fascinating character. He's not dumb. He's not just crude. He is intentional, and he justifies his behaviors. And if you look at lots of fallen leaders, they convince themselves that their immorality is actually a form of morality to justify their ends. And that, to me, is a much more fascinating thing than someone who just doesn't have a compass to begin with.
So, again, not to spoil, but the book ends, and I mean, the book, there's a resolution, but there's clearly some things left that could lead to a third book. Let me just put it that way. Are you working on a third book?
I am indeed.
And where are you in the process?
The beginning.
Well, let me tell you. I mean, she knows this. I'm very excited about. I mean, I love this book, but I'm also very excited how this book ends, setting the stage for the third book. The third.
Can we speak of third books for a second?
Oh, okay.
So
this comes out July 11th. It has not come out yet.
It does not, but this is a third book, is it not?
It is.
The Charlie and Margaret Martyr mysteries.
Yes.
So I am deep into the Hellfire Club, which is the first one, and I am eager to get to book 2 in time for book 3. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Charlie and Margaret?
So I don't know what people have read, but so Charlie Martyr is a congressman in 1954 in the Hellfire Club, and he has a brilliant wife who's a zoologist named Margaret. So the first book takes place in 1954 and is a lot about the McCarthy era. All of them are about today, but using the tropes and the history of the past. The second book, The Devil May Dance, is Charlie and Margaret go to Hollywood and investigate to see if Frank Sinatra is actually mobbed up. And the third book, which comes out July 11th, and just let me tell you, there are book plates out there that I signed. A special, All the Demons Are Here book plates. So if you buy a book, you can take the book plate and then they'll mail you the book, just FYI. If you want to do that, they're there.
Do that. Everybody, hold on, stop.
So
everybody do that, okay? You should clap and say you're going to do that. There we go.
I think you'll like it. I mean, as a writer, I think like I've grown a lot as a writer, and I've tried new things, and I'm sure you feel the same way. So this is their kids. Ike and Lucy are in their 20s, and they're in the 70s, and this book takes place in the post-Watergate era, and it deals with, first of all the crazy stuff that was going on in 1977, like Evel Knievel and the death of Elvis and UFOs and disco, but beyond, and the Summer of Sam. But beyond that, it is about these two characters. And I tried something new, and I know you're always up for like challenging yourself as a writer. You know, today I'm going to write a children's book. Today I'm going to write a nonfiction book. You know, like I mean, I alternated chapters, first person. Ike does a chapter, then his sister Lucy does a chapter, then Ike, and they're telling their different stories that converge. So that was
awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, so I hope you like it. I hope you check it out. What other, because I know you are an ambitious person in terms of your writing, as anybody can tell, romance novels, 2 nonfiction bestsellers, a children's book bestseller, now 2 fiction bestsellers. And look, politicians write books, but usually they're not very good. They're not, but this is really good. It's a really good thriller. Do you have other things that you want to try? As a writer, do you want to try to write a screenplay? Do you want to try to write poetry? Like, what? Tell me more about like other itches you want to scratch.
So I wrote poetry when I was younger. I've written plays. I will write screenplays. I have a production company. So when I have a little bit of time, I'm going to try my hand at screenplays, but not during the writer's strike. Solidarity. I've got a teenage superhero novel that I started on and I need to get back to.
It's a novel, though, not a comic book?
No, it's a novel.
Because Ta-Nehisi did a comic book, you know.
I know.
Yeah.
So this one,
Ta-Nehisi Coates, great writer, and he did a bunch of Black Panther
Yeah.
comics, just fantastic. Yeah.
No, right now it's a novel, and she's got a really interesting backstory. So imagine a teenager who has superpowers and amnesia, and the ability to manipulate your emotions. Aren't you scared? So that's her story. And then I actually have a children's book for middle school, so chapter book that I started. So if you think about what happens when you forget an idea or you lose a sock or you erase something, like where does it go? What if it goes into this other world? And what happens in that other world? So, and I've got nieces and nephews who I've mentioned this to, and now I have to write these things down because they're like, well, you said you were going to tell us a story, so I've got to get around to it. So yes, I love writing. I think words are fascinating, and I think storytelling is not just an art, it is an exercise in community. It is how you can connect with people who don't think they have anything in common. It's how you can explore ideas. But it's also just a fun thing to do. And my mom was a research librarian. Both my parents are ministers now, but my mom was a research librarian. My dad used to just tell us really fun bedtime stories. I love storytelling, and I love it in all of its facets and all of its forms, whether it's on screen or in poetry or in a book. And so I'm going to keep writing as long as I get to do it.
It's amazing. President Obama writes in longhand on yellow legal pads. Where do you write? How do you write?
If it's the first idea, I will sometimes write it out in longhand. If I know the story, I will usually just type on a computer. I will often outline by hand. So the children's books I've written, they start on paper. So because I just want to feel the story and think about the kids. But it's also fun just to because when you're writing for kids, when you're writing for young children, you really want to think about the words you're giving them. You want to think about the length of a line and the cadence of a story. And so doing that in longhand is actually easier. And then I translate it to typing and then I start editing. Something like Rogue Justice, it starts on a computer.
I want to ask the audience to be honest with this. I want you to applaud if you yourself have ever thought that you could write, not just, it could be a novel, it could be nonfiction, it could be a poem, it could be a play, it could be a screenplay, whatever. If you have ever thought it and written down even one word in that, I want you to applaud. So that's a lot of hopes and dreams. No. No. I'm going to be nice and encouraging here. Hold on. That's a lot of hopes and dreams. What advice do you get them so it's not just that one word on the page, it actually ends with a published work?
Don't think about it as a book. Think about it as a story. Stories tell themselves. You help them along. But the minute you make it a book or a project, it becomes work. And when it becomes work, it becomes hard. And when it becomes hard, it's easy to walk away from it. I tell stories. And sometimes the stories are fiction, sometimes they're nonfiction, sometimes they're for kids, sometimes they're for teenagers, sometimes they're for adults. Sometimes they're just for me and other people can eavesdrop if they want to read about it. I've written many of the men I need to meet one day and marry. And so the point is, tell your story in whatever form it takes, but do not make it so complicated in terms of its outcome that it never becomes reality for you.
Do you, when you write your fiction, do you adhere to the 3-act structure? And for those who don't know what I mean, Act 1, chase your hero up a tree. Act 2, throw rocks at your hero. Act 3, get your hero out of the tree.
So yeah, I call it create a problem, complicate the problem, and then solve the problem. And the books that you hate, create a problem and solve the problem, but instead of complicating the problem, they just keep restating the problem. So the books that get really frustrating, you're like, just call him, or just turn over the rock, or when you're like really annoyed, it's because they didn't complicate the problem, or they complicated it and solved it too soon, and then you've got another 200 pages to go. And by the time you get to the end, you're just like, I hate you, I hate the characters, and I don't ever want to see you in my house again.
So can I tell you one of the reasons I like writing in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the fourth book will be in the 80s is because I started writing a book that's set in the present, and then everything was like, well, why didn't she just Google that? Or why didn't he just call him? And then I started noticing how many movies and TV shows have scenes set out in the desert where the phones don't have any cell service because the writers just are like, oh, and suddenly in Oklahoma they've decided to, right? I mean, but you write in the present and you avoid that. Do you find that difficult at all though?
No, because I find things that terrify you. So even if you have a phone, you still can't solve the problem. Right, yeah. No, I mean, one of the reasons I like to write about topics. So, like, I wrote a romance novel about ethnobotany. Raise your hand if you know ethnobotany. Show off. Put your hand down. But yeah, so I like to write about topics where the average person, and clearly you're above average, that most people don't know anything about it, and so it feels smart to solve the problem, but I also try to write, I try to solve the immediate, like you're never gonna read a story and be like, why didn't she? She did it, and this is the terrible thing that happened because she did. And if she does do something that feels stupid, this is why she did it, and you realize, okay, yeah, I mean, you should have had another option, but you didn't. So what I don't ask readers to do is to just go with it just because I was too lazy to solve the problem. I'm gonna give you a problem, and if I'm gonna complicate it, it's gonna make sense in the world that I've created. You were talking about him earlier, much like a Tarantino movie. Like you agree that this is what's gonna happen, even though no, it's not going to, but he sticks to his architecture enough that when you're in the house, you're like, okay, I could do that.
I was telling her before that I just finished the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I listened to on tape. Jennifer Jason Leigh reads it, and it's not actually just a novelization of the movie. It's backstory. It's basically, I think, stuff that he just had to leave on the cutting room floor because he wasn't going to do a 10-hour movie. But then we started talking about books on tape, and you do not read. You read your children's book and you read your nonfiction on tape, but you don't do your fiction.
So I've got 2 children's books, and those are easy to do. I've got 2 nonfiction; those are easy to do. I can do voices, but not great. And I've got too many characters. And the young woman who does the voices, you should, if you like audiobooks, she is fantastic. And I'm listening, I'm like, ooh, she said that? He did this? I mean, when you can be surprised by your own story being told, she was really good. And I understand that you did yours yourself.
I did the Hellfire Club. And first of all, it takes days and days and days. It's not abridged. When we grew up, the books on tape were like an hour version of, a 10, I
didn't realize what Sophie's, I'm about to make a terrible joke. Never mind. I backed away from it.
Yeah,
Please forgive me.
It's good. So I did the Hellfire Club, and then they did not ask me back to do The Devil May Dance, which was okay with me because I didn't want to have to sing, and I invented a lot of songs in The Devil May Dance. But I did think that was curious that I got fired from doing the audio version of my own book.
They just knew you had more important things to do with your time.
But I was able to come up with the difference between Bobby Kennedy is he's talked a little higher than John F. Kennedy. Now you understand why they didn't ask me to do the book, I guess. Anyway, we got the same guy that did my nonfiction book, The Outpost, about Afghanistan, did this one, the Ike chapters, and also the Hellfire Club. But it's funny. It's the audio world is a wild world. But I never used to. Dana Bash told me you really should listen to books on tape. I've been listening to books on tape, and she was completely right. Like, so many of them are great.
They are. I mean, I love reading. I also love listening to books on tape. I feel the same way about television. People who say, well, I read, I don't watch TV. I'm like, why is this a choice? Like, I watch a lot of TV. I watch an inordinate amount of television. I read a lot of books. I listen to a lot of books on tape. I like being entertained. I like smart stories. And I don't really care about the medium. I just care about what I get. And it's a different art form to hear, when you hear someone doing those characterizations, that is a fascinating skill set, one I do not possess and do not intend to learn. But I appreciate the people who can do it.
So I listened to the Obama, but we're out of time, so I'm just going to finish it and then ask you one last question. Okay. I listened to Obama's book, which is great. It's Obama reading it. Before the great unpleasantness, I listened to Will Smith, his autobiography, which is fantastic and had music. I wouldn't recommend it now because probably not rooting for him anymore. But or maybe you are. If you're rooting for him, listen to his book. It was good. And I'm listening right now to Steve Martin, and he has a book with Adam Gopnik, and it's amazing. It's amazing. It's just them having conversations about his career, and then they go back in time and play some of the bits, and it's fantastic. So let me just get this straight because I want to make sure I understand. So you have a children's book that you're working on. Then you also have book 3 in the Avery Keane series. You have the young adult superhero book. And do you have another nonfiction that you're working on?
I'm in the process of writing a proposal, so it's not ready for prime time yet. But yes, I'm thinking about a nonfiction piece.
How much so I find editing to be something that I need and want more of than I get. And I go out and I hire editors because I want the book to be as good and as tight as possible. And no matter how good the editor of the publishing house is, I want more. I want more eyes. I want more feedback. I think some of this comes from television because it's so collaborative. What's your experience and what's your take on that?
I have brothers and sisters. I'm the second of 6 kids, and my siblings love me, but they have no problem telling me what's wrong. So, and they all have very different, different approaches to things. So I have siblings I give my nonfiction to, siblings I give my fiction to, siblings I give my children's books to. Look, my parents did a great job of just creating a nice little factory for me. And so I don't have outside editors. It's usually, like when I was writing Rogue Justice, there was a moment where the characters did something, and I was like, there's something wrong here. And so I gave it to 2 of my siblings to read, and they both came back. They're like, oh, it's boring. This is why. But they were both able to tell me why they didn't like it, and it was exactly what I hadn't been able to articulate it to myself, but I was like, if that's the problem, I now know how to fix it. But when you're so deep in a story, because of the time frame within which I write fast and tight. And so I don't have a lot of sort of pontification time. So having their eyes is incredibly helpful. But it's also helpful. I've written a lot of books, so I've learned how to edit myself as I go along. And between them and then my editor, Jason Kaufman, who's my editor at Doubleday, is amazing and incredibly patient and very, very comfortable telling me, this is stupid, take it out. He never says it that way, but if you read between the lines and the strike-throughs, you're like, that was a bad idea, take it out. So I think wherever you can find the support, you should find it. If it's a writer's group, if it's taking a course, find the help you need to help you get better at what you do. I just happen to have it. They live with me, or my parents made them, and so I don't have to pay for outside support.
Do you think that there is any part of them that enjoys telling you, this is boring?
Oh,
Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
They are my younger brothers. I have one older sister.
Is that the judge?
No. So my older sister is a college professor. Yeah. So she's like.
So you got a professor, a judge.
So Andy's the vice president of a college and an anthropologist. Leslie's a judge. Richard's a producer. Walter is in medias res. And Janine is a computational biologist. I'm telling you, they're incredibly useful. It's like having your own encyclopedia set at home, and they can all do stuff.
But
it
also,
is fantastic.
Imagine this incredibly brilliant family, these other 5, and all anybody wants to talk to them about is their second oldest sister. I'm a judge, for God's sake. No, I'm not going to pass on message to my sister. I'm a college president. I think they love telling you when stuff's boring.
They are very comfortable telling me when stuff sucks, yeah.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much. Be sure
Thank you, Jake.
to read this book.
Thank Jake Tapper.
Thank you.